The biting wind carried snow across the desolate Wyoming landscape as Owen Parker pulled his hat lower, shielding his eyes from the stinging flakes while his horse trudged forward through the gathering storm. The year was 1883, and the promise of new beginnings had drawn him westward from Pennsylvania following the war. But 5 years of ranching had taught him that the West gave nothing without demanding payment in blood, sweat, or tears. Owen had not intended to be out in such weather, but a stray heifer had wandered from his small herd, and losing even one animal could mean the difference between surviving the winter or starving before spring. He had tracked the foolish creature for miles before finding it sheltered in a stand of pines, and now with the heifer secured with a rope. He was making the slow journey home as darkness threatened and the temperature plummeted. The crack of a branch breaking through the howl of wind made him pause. His hand instinctively moved to the Colt revolver at his hip, a habit formed during years when rustlers and bandits made these lands even more dangerous than nature itself. His eyes narrowed as he peered through the swirling snow, catching sight of a dark shape huddled beneath a half-dead cottonwood tree just off the trail. At first, he thought it might be a wounded animal or perhaps a trap set by outlaws. But as he drew closer, the shape resolved into a woman, her back pressed against the trunk, knees drawn up, and something clutched to her chest. She wore a thin dress that might have once been blue, but was now gray with dirt and damp. Her dark hair whipped around her face in the wind, and even from several yards away, Owen could see her body trembling violently. "Madam?" he called, his voice nearly lost in the wind. He dismounted carefully, keeping one hand on his gun while leading his horse closer. "You all right there?" She jerked her head up, revealing a face both beautiful and drawn with exhaustion. Her eyes, wide with fear, locked onto him, and she pulled whatever she held closer to her chest. That's when Owen heard it, a tiny mewling cry that somehow cut through the howl of the storm. A baby. The woman was holding a baby wrapped in what looked like nothing more than a threadbare blanket, and both were shivering uncontrollably in the brutal cold. Owen didn't hesitate. Without a word, he shrugged off his heavy buffalo coat and stepped forward, wrapping it around both the woman and child in one motion. The coat was worn but warm, lined with wool and weatherproofed with years of use. It enveloped them completely, and the woman's eyes widened in surprise rather than fear. "Name's Owen Parker," he said, crouching before her. "My ranch is about 2 miles south of here. You and your little one won't survive the night out here. Will you let me take you somewhere warm?" She stared at him for a long moment, her lips blue with cold. Finally, she nodded once, clutching her baby closer beneath the warm folds of his coat. "Natalie," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. "Natalie Adams, and this is Emma." Owen nodded, noting how the tiny bundle in her arms had quieted somewhat in the sudden warmth. "Can you stand, Miss Adams? We need to get moving before this storm worsens." He helped her to her feet, steadying her when she swayed dangerously. Up close, he could see she was even worse off than he'd initially thought, her skin pale, beneath a layer of dirt, cheekbones too sharp in her thin face, and eyes sunken with exhaustion. "Where's your horse? Your wagon?" he asked, looking round for any sign of transportation. "Gone," she said simply, and something in her tone told Owen not to press further, at least not until they were safe from the elements. Owen led her to his horse, a sturdy chestnut gelding named Rusty, who stomped impatiently in the snow. "I'll need to lift you up," he said, and waited for her nod before carefully helping her into the saddle, making sure the coat stayed wrapped around her and the baby. He took the reins and began leading Rusty through the snow, the heifer trailing behind them. The going was slow and difficult, with the wind growing stronger and the snow falling faster. Owen found himself glancing back frequently to check on Natalie and her child. Each time he found her staring ahead with grim determination, one hand clutching the saddle horn, the other holding her baby securely against her chest inside his coat. By the time the lights of his modest ranch house came into view, the snow was nearly knee-deep and full darkness had fallen. Owen had never been so glad to see the weathered logs of his home, smoke curling from the stone chimney indicating that the fire he'd banked that morning was still burning. He led Rusty directly to the barn, wanting to get the woman and child out of the weather as quickly as possible. Once inside the relative warmth of the structure, he helped Natalie down, noting how she winced when her feet touched the ground. I need to tend to the animals quickly, he explained. Then I'll take you into the house. Can you wait here for just a few minutes? Natalie nodded, sinking onto a hay bale, still wrapped in his coat. Thank you, she whispered, the first words she'd spoken since telling him her name. Owen worked faster than he ever had, unsaddling Rusty, putting the heifer in a stall with fresh hay and water, and making sure all the other animals were secure for the night. Within 10 minutes, he was guiding Natalie through the snow toward the main house, one hand on her elbow to steady her, the other carrying a lantern to light their way. The house was simple but solid, 2 rooms with a stone fireplace in the main living area that also served as kitchen and dining room. A small bedroom lay beyond a rough-hewn door. Owen immediately built up the fire, adding logs until it blazed with welcome heat. Sit by the fire, he urged, pulling his single rocking chair closer to the flames. I'll make some coffee and heat up some stew. Natalie sank into the chair, finally loosening her grip on his coat enough to reveal the baby's face. Emma couldn't have been more than a few months old, with a tuft of dark hair and pink cheeks that had thankfully begun to regain their color in the warmth of the coat. Owen busied himself at the iron stove, setting coffee to boil and retrieving a pot of venison stew he'd made 2 days prior. He tried not to stare at his unexpected guests, but couldn't help stealing glances as Natalie gently rocked her daughter, murmuring soft words too quiet for him to hear. How old is she? He asked, breaking the silence. 4 months, Natalie replied, her voice stronger now. Born in August. Owen nodded, pouring a mug of coffee and adding a generous spoonful of sugar before bringing it to her. It's hot, he warned, but it'll help warm you from the inside. She accepted the mug gratefully, taking a cautious sip while still holding Emma securely with her other arm. The baby had fallen asleep, her tiny face peaceful now that she was warm. I don't mean to pry, Owen said carefully as he stirred the stew, but how did you end up out there in the storm? These parts aren't exactly close to town. Natalie's eyes flicked to his face, then back to her daughter. For a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but quiet. My husband died 3 months ago. Fever took him fast. We had a small place about 15 miles east of here. She paused, taking another sip of coffee. Yesterday, 3 men came, said the land was theirs now, that Thomas, my husband, had borrowed money he never repaid. They gave me an hour to pack what I could carry. Owen's jaw tightened. He had heard of such things happening, land grabs disguised as debt collection, targeting widows and those who couldn't fight back. Did you know about any debt? He asked. She shook her head. Thomas never mentioned anything. We struggled, but we managed. These men, her voice faltered. They didn't look like bankers. They looked like the kind of men Thomas always warned me about. And they just put you out? With a baby? In winter? Owen couldn't keep the anger from his voice. They took our wagon and horse as payment, said I should be grateful they were letting me keep our personal belongings. Her laugh was bitter. I could only carry so much on foot. I had to choose between blankets and food. I chose food, thinking I could walk to town before nightfall, but then the storm came. Owen ladled stew into a bowl and brought it to her along with a spoon. Eat, he urged. You need your strength. She balanced the bowl carefully, managing to eat while still holding Emma. Owen noticed the trembling in her hands had lessened, but exhaustion was etched in every line of her face. Those men were lying, he said flatly. That's a common trick around these parts. Find someone vulnerable, claim a debt, take their land. By the time the law might get involved, they've already sold it or started working it themselves. I figured as much, Natalie said quietly. But what could I do? It was 3 armed men against me and Emma. You did the right thing, Owen assured her. Staying alive is what matters. Things can be replaced, lives can't. As Natalie ate, Owen moved about the room, gathering blankets and putting fresh sheets on his bed. You and Emma will take the bedroom, he said, his tone brooking no argument. I'll sleep out here by the fire. I can't put you out of your bed, Natalie protested. You're not putting me anywhere. I'm offering, Owen replied with a small smile. Besides, I've slept on worse than a floor beside a warm fire. Once she had eaten, Owen showed her to the bedroom, lighting the small oil lamp on the bedside table. There's water in the pitcher if you want to wash up. I'll be right outside if you need anything. Natalie stood in the doorway, his coat still draped around her shoulders, her daughter sleeping peacefully in her arms. Mr. Parker, she began. Owen, he corrected gently. Owen, she amended. I don't know how to thank you. If you hadn't come along when you did. No need for thanks, he said. Anyone would have done the same. But they both knew that wasn't true. Not in these harsh lands where survival often depended on looking after oneself first. Owen had seen plenty of good people turn away from others in need simply because helping might risk their own precarious existence. Get some rest, he said softly. We can figure everything else out tomorrow. As he closed the door, leaving Natalie and Emma to privacy and rest, Owen couldn't help but wonder what everything else might entail. He had a small ranch, barely making ends meet himself. He wasn't equipped to help a woman and baby beyond immediate shelter from the storm. Yet something about Natalie's quiet strength in the face of devastating circumstances stirred something inside him, something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Owen made his bed on the floor near the fireplace, using his saddle as a pillow and a spare blanket for warmth. As he drifted toward sleep, the storm howling outside his sturdy walls, he found himself grateful that he'd gone searching for that wayward heifer today. Some would call it coincidence. Owen's mother would have called it providence. Whatever it was, he couldn't shake the feeling that finding Natalie Adams and her daughter might change everything. Dawn broke clear and cold, the storm having blown itself out during the night. Owen woke with the first light, stiff from sleeping on the floor, but rested nonetheless. He moved quietly, stoking the fire and putting coffee on to boil, before pulling on his boots and heavy work coat not as warm as his buffalo coat, but sufficient for morning chores. The animals needed tending regardless of unexpected guests, and Owen spent the next hour in the barn, feeding and watering his small herd of cattle, 2 horses, and the few chickens that provided eggs and occasional meat. When he returned to the house, stamping snow from his boots on the porch, he was surprised to find Natalie up and moving around his kitchen. She had found his cast-iron pan and had eggs frying, along with slices of salt pork. His buffalo coat was neatly folded over the back of a chair, and she had apparently found time to wash both herself and Emma, who was wrapped in a clean blanket and lying in a makeshift cradle fashioned from a wooden box lined with quilts. "Good morning," Natalie said, a hint of uncertainty in her voice. "I hope you don't mind. I wanted to make myself useful." Owen shook his head, removing his coat and hanging it by the door. "Not at all. It's been a long while since anyone cooked breakfast in this house besides me." "It's the least I can do," she said, turning back to the stove. "After what you did for us yesterday." Owen poured himself coffee and checked on Emma, who was awake and staring up with curious dark blue eyes. "She looks better this morning," he observed. "Yes," Natalie agreed, bringing plates to the small table. "She's resilient, more so than her mother, perhaps." "I'd say you're both plenty resilient," Owen countered, pulling out a chair for Natalie before taking his own seat. "Not everyone would have survived what you went through yesterday, baby or not." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. Owen noticed that Natalie's dress, though clean now, was worn thin in places and darned multiple times. Like everything else she likely owned, it had been well cared for, but was nearing the end of its useful life. "What will you do now?" he asked finally, the question that had kept him awake for part of the night. Natalie set down her fork, her expression composed, but her eyes betraying her uncertainty. "I have an aunt in Denver," she said. "I've never met her, she's my mother's sister, but Mother always said she would welcome me if I ever needed help. I was trying to reach town to send a telegram when the storm hit." "Denver's a far piece from here," Owen said, "especially in winter." "I know," Natalie admitted, "but I don't have many options. I have a little money saved, not much, but maybe enough for train fare once I reach Cheyenne." Owen nodded, considering. "The road to town will be nearly impassable for a few days after this snow. And traveling with a baby in this weather—" He let the sentence hang, not needing to elaborate on the dangers. "We've imposed on your kindness enough," Natalie said quickly. "Perhaps you could point us toward town once the road clears a bit. We'll find our way." "That's not what I meant," Owen said. "I was going to suggest you stay here until spring. Winter's just beginning and the trails will only get worse from here. Come spring, I can take you to Cheyenne myself. Make sure you and Emma get on a train safely." Natalie stared at him, clearly taken aback by the offer. "Stay here? For months? But you barely know us." "I know enough," Owen said simply. "I know you're in trouble and need help. I know that baby deserves a fighting chance. And I know my mother would come back from the grave and haunt me if I turned a woman and child out to face winter alone." A small smile touched Natalie's lips at that. She sounds like she was a formidable woman. That she was, Owen agreed, returning the smile. Look, I won't pretend it's a grand offer. This place is small and I don't have much. But there's enough food to see us through winter. The house is warm and you'd both be safe here. And what would you expect in return? Natalie asked, her voice neutral, but her eyes watchful. Owen understood the question beneath the question. A single woman alone in the West quickly learned that offers of help often came with unspoken expectations, expectations that had nothing to do with kindness. Only what you've already done, he said. Help with cooking and such if you're willing. I won't lie, having someone else around to share the work would make things easier. But that's all. You'll have the bedroom. I'll stay out here. When spring comes, I'll take you to Cheyenne as promised. No strings attached. Natalie studied his face for a long moment, as if searching for any sign of deception. Whatever she saw there must have reassured her, because she eventually nodded. Thank you, she said quietly. We accept your offer, Mr. Parker Owen, but I insist on earning our keep. I can cook, clean, sew, and I'm not afraid of hard work. Never thought you were, Owen replied. And speaking of work, I should get back to mine. The cattle need tending, and I have repairs to make on the north fence. Will you and Emma be all right here for a few hours? We'll be fine, Natalie assured him. Is there anything I can do while you're out? Mending, perhaps? I noticed your shirts could use some attention. Owen felt a flush of embarrassment. He'd never been much for sewing, and his attempts at repairing his clothes were functional at best. If you're offering, I wouldn't say no, but don't feel obligated. It would be my pleasure, Natalie said, and for the first time, Owen saw a genuine smile light her face. It transformed her features, revealing dimples in both cheeks and a warmth in her eyes that took his breath away. Owen nodded awkwardly and headed back outside, oddly unsettled by that smile and what it had done to his steady heartbeat. The days that followed fell into a surprisingly comfortable routine. Owen tended to the ranch work, chopped firewood, hunted when weather permitted, and made repairs around the property. Natalie kept the house, cooked meals that were far superior to Owen's basic fare, mended clothes, and cared for Emma. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes in comfortable silence. Owen found himself sharing stories of his childhood in Pennsylvania, his time fighting in the war, and his journey west seeking a new beginning. Natalie spoke of growing up in a small town in Missouri, meeting Thomas when she was 18, and their decision to seek their fortune in Wyoming territory 2 years earlier. Thomas was a dreamer, she said one evening as Emma slept in her box cradle, and snow fell gently outside the windows. He always believed the next big opportunity was just around the corner. That's why we came west. He heard about land for homesteading and was certain we'd build a cattle empire. Many men come west with that dream, Owen observed, whittling a small wooden horse that he hoped might amuse Emma when she was a bit older. Few achieve it. Did you? Natalie asked. Have that dream? Owen considered the question, his knife pausing in its work. Not exactly, he said finally. I came west because there was nothing left for me back east. My parents were gone, our farm sold to pay debts. I fought 4 years in a war that left me with nightmares and not much else. The West seemed like somewhere a man could start fresh, build something of his own. And have you? Built something of your own? Owen looked around his modest home, thinking of the 30 head of cattle in his pastures, the 2 horses, the land that was paid for and legally his. I suppose I have, in a way. It's not much compared to what some men have built, but it's mine. No one can take it from me. Natalie nodded, her hands busy with knitting. She was making a blanket for Emma from yarn Owen had traded for in town before the first snow. That's more than many have, she said quietly. More than I have now. You have Emma, Owen pointed out, and your strength. Those count for something. Yes, she agreed, a small smile playing about her lips. I suppose they do. As December gave way to January, and January to February, the small ranch house became a true home in ways it had never been before. Owen found himself looking forward to returning to the house after a day's work, anticipating the warmth and light he would find inside, not just from the fire, but from the presence of Natalie and Emma. The baby grew stronger each day, beginning to roll over and make gurgling sounds of happiness. Owen discovered a surprising joy in making her smile, in watching her tiny fingers grasp at his much larger ones when he held her. And Natalie. Natalie became someone he couldn't imagine not seeing each day. She had filled out a bit with regular meals, her face losing the gaunt, desperate look it had worn when he found her. Her dark hair, which she usually wore in a practical braid, shone in the firelight when she brushed it out in the evenings. Sometimes Owen would find himself staring, entranced by the simple domesticity of a woman brushing her hair by his hearth before forcing himself to look away. They were under his protection, his care, not objects for him to admire or covet. He reminded himself of this frequently, especially when he found his thoughts wandering in directions they shouldn't. February brought a thaw, brief but welcome, and Owen used the opportunity to ride into town for supplies. While there, he sent a telegram to Natalie's aunt in Denver, using money Natalie had given him from her small savings. The reply came the next day, and Owen read it on his way home, his heart sinking with each word. When he returned to the ranch, he found Natalie outside, taking advantage of the milder weather to hang laundry on the line while Emma napped inside. "You're back earlier than I expected," she said, smiling as he dismounted. "Was the trading post well stocked?" "Well enough," Owen said, beginning to unload supplies from his saddlebags. "I got coffee, sugar, flour, and some fabric I thought you might like for a new dress. The blue reminded me of your eyes." A flush colored Natalie's cheeks as she accepted the folded length of calico. "This is lovely, Owen, but you shouldn't have spent money on such things." "Consider it payment for all the fine cooking," he said with a shrug, avoiding her eyes as he continued unpacking. "Did the telegraph office have any response from my aunt?" Natalie asked, setting the fabric aside. Owen paused, then reached into his coat pocket. "Yes," he said, handing her the folded paper. "It came this morning." Natalie took the telegram, her expression hopeful as she unfolded it. Owen watched as she read, saw the hope in her eyes dim and then fade entirely. Her hand trembled slightly as she refolded the paper. "I see," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "It seems my aunt passed away last autumn. The person who answered my telegram is a neighbor who purchased her house." "I'm sorry, Natalie," Owen said sincerely. "I know you were counting on her help." Natalie nodded, turning back to the laundry, but not before Owen caught sight of tears gathering in her eyes. "It was a slim hope anyway," she said, her voice steady despite her obvious distress. "I never met the woman. She might not have welcomed us even if she were alive." "What will you do now?" Owen asked. The same question he had asked months ago when she first arrived. Natalie pinned a shirt to the line with more force than necessary. "I don't know," she admitted. "Denver seemed the only option because I had a connection there, however tenuous." "Now," she trailed off, shaking her head. "You could stay," Owen said, the words out of his mouth before he could consider their implications. "Here, I mean, with me." Natalie turned to look at him, surprise evident in her expression. "Stay? Permanently?" Owen set down the bag of flour he'd been holding and stepped closer to her. "Why not? These past months have been good. Better than good. You and Emma have made this place feel like a real home for the first time since I built it. And spring's coming, I could add on to the house. Build another room so you and Emma would have more space." "Owen," Natalie began, her voice gentle but cautious, "what exactly are you proposing?" It was a fair question, and one Owen hadn't fully thought through before speaking. But standing there in the winter sunshine, looking at this woman who had come to mean so much to him in such a short time, he knew there was only one answer. "Marriage," he said simply. "If you'd have me." Natalie's eyes widened. "Marriage? Owen, you can't possibly." "I can," he interrupted. "I do. I know it's sudden, and maybe not very romantic, but these months together, they've shown me what life could be like, should be like. I care for you, Natalie, and Emma too. I want to provide for you both, protect you, make a life with you." "And is that enough?" Natalie asked softly. "Caring? Protection? What about love, Owen?" Owen reached out, hesitantly taking her hand in his. Her skin was cold from the winter air, and he enfolded her smaller hand in both of his to warm it. "I believe love can grow from caring," he said carefully, "from respect and friendship. My parents had an arranged marriage at first, did you know that? My father told me once that he didn't love my mother when they wed." but he grew to love her more than his own life. I already care for you more than anyone I've known since my parents died. Is it so hard to believe that might become love in time? Natalie looked down at their joined hands. No, she said after a moment. It's not hard to believe, because I've felt it happening already, on my side. Owen's heart seemed to skip a beat. You have? She nodded, finally meeting his eyes again. I didn't want to. It felt disloyal to Thomas and foolish besides. You were offering shelter, kindness, not courtship. But still, I found myself feeling things I hadn't expected to feel again. Then say yes, Owen urged, tightening his grip on her hand. Stay with me. Be my wife. Let me be a father to Emma. We can build a good life here, the three of us. Natalie's free hand came up to cup his cheek, a gesture so unexpectedly tender that Owen found himself leaning into it like a man starved for touch, which, he realized, he had been. Yes, she said simply. I'll stay. I'll be your wife, Owen Parker. Owen's face broke into a grin so wide it almost hurt. Without thinking, he pulled Natalie into his arms, lifting her feet off the ground as he spun her in a circle of pure joy. Her surprised laughter rang out in the clear winter air. And when he set her down, they were both breathless and smiling. I promise I'll be a good husband, he said earnestly, still holding her close, and a good father to Emma. I'll work hard, provide for you both. You'll never have to face the world alone again. I know, Natalie said, her eyes shining with something Owen dared to hope might be the beginnings of love. I believe you. Inside the house, Emma began to cry, her nap evidently over. Natalie stepped back from Owen's embrace but kept hold of his hand. Come, she said. Let's go tell Emma she's gaining a father. Hand in hand, they walked toward the house toward their future together. Spring arrived early that year, as if nature itself approved of the new arrangement at the Parker Ranch. March brought mild temperatures and rain instead of snow, turning the landscape from white to a tentative green almost overnight. Owen worked from dawn to dusk expanding the cabin, adding a proper bedroom for Emma and enlarging the main living area. Natalie planted a vegetable garden, setting out seedlings she had started indoors during the late winter months. Emma, now 8 months old, was crawling everywhere and beginning to pull herself up on furniture, babbling constantly in her own private language. They were married in early April by the circuit preacher who visited the scattered ranches and homesteads every few months. It was a simple ceremony in their own home, witnessed only by the banker from town and his wife, who had taken a liking to Natalie during her visits with Owen. That night, after Emma was asleep in her new room, Owen and Natalie stood together in the doorway of what was now truly their bedroom, both suddenly shy despite the months of living under the same roof. I meant what I said about not expecting anything, Owen said quietly. If you need more time, Natalie silenced him by pressing her fingers gently to his lips. I don't, she said simply. We're husband and wife now, Owen, in all ways. She reached up and began unpinning her hair, letting the dark waves fall over her shoulders. Owen watched, mesmerized, as she then turned her back to him. Would you help with the buttons? She asked softly. Owen's fingers trembled slightly as he unfastened the long row of buttons down the back of her wedding dress, the new blue dress he had commissioned from the seamstress in town as a surprise. As the fabric parted, revealing the pale skin of her back, Owen was overcome with tenderness for this woman who had brought such unexpected joy into his life. You're beautiful, he whispered, placing a gentle kiss on the nape of her neck. Natalie turned in his arms, her eyes reflecting the same desire and affection he felt. So are you, she said, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw. My husband. That night, Owen discovered that the caring he had felt for Natalie had indeed already grown into something deeper, something he could only call love. And in her arms, in her tender touches and passionate responses, he found confirmation that she felt the same. Summer brought prosperity to the Parker Ranch. The cattle thrived, producing healthy calves that would fetch good prices at market. Owen's careful management of the land meant lush grass for grazing, and the vegetable garden Natalie tended yielded more than enough for their table, with extra to preserve for winter. Emma took her first steps in July, toddling unsteadily from Owen to Natalie as they knelt on opposite sides of the room, both laughing and applauding her achievement. She was calling Owen Pa now, a sound that never failed to bring a lump to his throat. "She loves you so much," Natalie observed one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset while Emma slept inside. "Sometimes I think she believes you've always been her father." Owen took Natalie's hand, running his thumb over the simple gold band he'd placed on her finger months ago. "In all the ways that matter, I have been," he said. "Blood doesn't make a family. Love does." Natalie leaned against his shoulder, a contented sigh escaping her. "I never thought I could be this happy again," she admitted. "After Thomas died, I thought that part of my life was over, that Emma and I would always be alone, always struggling. And now I know better," she said, turning to press a kiss to his cheek. "Now I know that sometimes the worst storm can lead you right where you're meant to be." Owen smiled, remembering that snowy day when he'd found her shivering beneath the cottonwood tree. Emma clutched to her chest. "Providence," he murmured. "What's that?" Natalie asked. "Something my mother used to say," Owen explained, "that there's no such thing as coincidence, only Providence guiding us where we need to go." "I like that," Natalie said thoughtfully. "It means everything happens for a reason, even the difficult things." "Even the terrible things," Owen agreed. "Without the war, I wouldn't have come west. Without losing Thomas, you wouldn't have been under that tree. Without that storm," he trailed off, the implications clear. "Without that storm, you wouldn't have found us," Natalie finished for him. "And without your coat, we might not have survived." Owen pulled her closer, breathing in the scent of her hair lavender from the dried sprigs she kept in their dresser drawers. "I've been meaning to ask," he said. "Why did you trust me that day? You were alone, vulnerable. I could have been anyone, meant you harm. But you came with me. Let me help you." Natalie was quiet for a moment, considering. "It was your eyes," she said finally. "When you wrapped that coat around us without a word, not asking questions, not demanding explanations, just offering warmth and protection, I looked into your eyes and saw kindness there. Real kindness, not the false kind that wants something in return." "I'd like to think I'm a decent man," Owen said, "but I did want something in return, though I didn't know it then." "What's that?" Natalie asked, tilting her head to look up at him. "This," Owen said simply, gesturing to their home, the land, their life together. "A family. Love. All the things I never thought I'd have." Natalie smiled, that radiant smile that still made his heart skip a beat. "Then I'd say we both got exactly what we needed, wouldn't you?" In answer, Owen lowered his lips to hers, kissing her with all the love that had grown in his heart over the past months. As the last rays of sunset painted the sky in gold and pink, he silently thanked whatever providence had guided him to that cottonwood tree on that snowy day, and for the impulse that had led him to wrap his coat around a shivering woman and her baby without a word. The years passed with the rhythm of seasons on the Parker ranch. The small homestead grew into a prosperous cattle operation as Owen's careful breeding and land management paid off. The house expanded too, with additional rooms added as their family grew. Emma was joined by a brother, James, born in the spring following Owen and Natalie's marriage. 2 years later came Sarah, and finally 3 years after that, William completed their family. The 4 children filled the house with laughter, squabbles, and the wonderful chaos that Owen had once never dared to dream might be his. On the 10th anniversary of the day Owen had found Natalie and Emma beneath the cottonwood tree, they held a celebration. Friends from neighboring ranches in the growing town nearby gathered to share food, music, and stories. The Parker Ranch had become known not only for its fine cattle, but for its hospitality, largely due to Natalie's warm nature and Owen's quiet generosity. As twilight fell and their guests began to depart, Owen found Natalie standing alone on the porch, looking out at the land that had become their kingdom. Her hair, still dark but now with strands of silver threading through it, was loose around her shoulders the way he loved best. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Parker," he said, coming to stand beside her. Natalie smiled, leaning into him as his arm circled her waist. "I was thinking about what might have happened if you hadn't found us that day," she said. "If you'd gone a different way tracking that heifer, or if the storm had started just an hour later." "Best not to dwell on might-have-beens," Owen advised, though he had entertained similar thoughts himself over the years. "We found each other. That's what matters." "Yes," Natalie agreed, turning to face him. At 42, she was more beautiful to him than ever, the years having added character and depth to her features rather than diminishing her beauty. We found each other, and we built this life together. It's more than I ever dreamed possible. Me too, Owen admitted. Sometimes I still wake up surprised to find you beside me, as if it might all have been a wonderful dream. Natalie reached up to cup his face between her hands, a gesture that had become familiar over their years together, yet never lost its tenderness. Not a dream, she assured him, just a very fortunate reality. From inside the house came the sound of children's laughter, followed by Emma's voice now, a young woman of 16, calling for her siblings to settle down for bed. Natalie and Owen shared a smile at the evidence of their daughter growing into her responsibility as the eldest. "We should go in," Natalie said. "Make sure they actually go to sleep instead of continuing the celebration in their rooms." But Owen held her back for a moment longer, suddenly needing to ask the question that had been on his mind throughout the day's festivities. "Are you happy, Natalie? Truly happy with the life we've built?" Natalie's eyes softened as she gazed up at him. "Owen Parker," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "that is the most unnecessary question you've ever asked me. Yes, I am happy. Completely, utterly happy. You are the best man I've ever known, the finest father our children could have, and the only husband I would ever want." Relief and joy flooded through Owen at her words. He leaned down to kiss her, pouring 10 years of love and gratitude into the gesture. "What was that for?" Natalie asked when they finally parted, both a little breathless. "For trusting me enough to come in from the cold," Owen said simply. "For making a home with me, for our children, for everything." Natalie's smile was as bright as it had been the day he proposed. "I should be the one thanking you," she countered. "You saved us, Owen. You gave us shelter when we had none, a family when we were alone, and love when I thought I'd never feel it again." "Then I guess we're even," Owen said with a grin, pulling her close again. As they stood together in the gathering darkness, the sounds of their children and the nighttime chorus of their land surrounding them, Owen reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From a chance encounter in a snowstorm to a life overflowing with love and purpose, it was more than he had ever dared to hope for when he'd wrapped his coat around a shivering woman and her baby all those years ago. Some might call it luck. Owen's mother would have called it providence. But whatever name it went by, Owen knew one thing for certain. Sometimes the greatest gifts came in the most unexpected moments, and the simplest acts of kindness could change lives forever. And as he led his wife inside to their warm home and sleeping children, Owen Parker knew with absolute certainty that he was the most fortunate man in all of Wyoming territory, perhaps in all the West, to have found such treasure in the midst of a winter storm.